They had him face down on the pavement, cuffed, humiliated, outside the very hospital where his mother lay fighting for her life. And just when it seemed no one would step in, a black SUV rolled up and out stepped a four-star general. What happened next silenced the entire crowd. This isn't just another viral headline. This is the true story of Lieutenant Jordan Ellis, a retired Marine who served his country for 16 years, only to be mistaken for a threat because of the color of his skin. But what started as injustice turned into a national moment of reckoning. If stories like this matter to you, please like this video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to my channel for more powerful stories rooted in truth, dignity, and justice. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday. Lieutenant Jordan Ellis had driven nearly 2 hours from his modest home in Decatur to the city's General Memorial Hospital. His mother, Eloise Ellis, his rock, his anchor, had suffered a sudden stroke 2 nights before and had been admitted to the ICU. Now stabilized, she was unconscious but holding on. And Jordan, recently retired after 16 years of service in the United States Marine Corps, needed to see her. Not just as a son, but as a man carrying the weight of everything she had once taught him: honor, humility, and the will to stand tall no matter the storm. He arrived just after noon. The summer heat pressed down on the pavement like an iron, but Jordan wore his formal Marine uniform anyway. Crisp, clean, metals polished, boots shining like glass. This wasn't about pride, it was about presence. His mother always said, "When you walk into a room, let your spirit speak before your mouth ever does." But in this parking lot, his spirit was about to be judged by the color of his skin before the meaning of his uniform. He had just stepped out of his Ford truck, keys still in hand, when the security guard posted near the ER base stared a little too long. Jordan offered a polite nod, no response. He started walking toward the ICU entrance, careful not to block the ambulance lane. That's when the guard reached for his radio and muttered something while watching Jordan's every move. Jordan paused. Was there a problem? Within 2 minutes, he got his answer. A patrol car turned into the hospital entrance, then another. No sirens, just a silent urgency, the kind that tells you they're not coming to ask questions, they're coming to take control. 2 police officers, one tall and square-jawed, the other stockier with mirrored sunglasses, stepped out of their vehicles with hands hovering over their holsters. "Sir, we've received a report of a suspicious individual in military attire near the emergency entrance," one officer said flatly. "We need you to stop right there." Jordan blinked, trying to process. Suspicious individual? "I'm Lieutenant Jordan Ellis," he said calmly. "United States Marine Corps, retired. I'm here to visit my mother. She's in ICU." The second officer didn't respond. Instead, he moved closer, scanning Jordan's uniform like it was stolen. "That real military issue?" he asked. Jordan inhaled slowly. "Yes, sir, every patch earned, every stripe served." But it didn't matter, not to them. The security guard watched silently from the distance, arms crossed. Jordan could feel the weight of a decision being made in real time, and not based on facts. It was based on what they thought they saw, a black man in uniform. And that's all it took. What began as a son's visit to his mother would soon become a national headline. But in that moment, Jordan stood still, unaware that within minutes, his entire life and the lives of 2 officers were about to change forever. The heat on the concrete was rising, but it was nothing compared to what Jordan felt building inside his chest. He stood still, shoulders squared, eyes steady, as the 2 officers closed in. Officer Clay, the taller of the 2 with a rigid jaw and a badge that gleamed too bright in the sunlight, took the lead. Officer Bronson trailed slightly behind, sunglasses hiding whatever judgment flickered in his eyes. "I need you to lie face down, now," Clay barked, drawing the kind of attention that made people nearby pause. A nurse standing outside for a breath of fresh air froze mid-step, clutching her ID badge. Jordan didn't move. "Sir, with all due respect, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a retired lieutenant. Here's my military ID." He slowly reached for the wallet tucked inside his front chest pocket, movements deliberate, respectful. Before the leather even cleared his jacket, Officer Bronson stepped in with a quick swipe of his arm. The wallet hit the pavement. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he snapped. Jordan instinctively raised his palms. "You asked for ID. I'm not resisting. My name is Lieutenant Jordan Ellis. My mother is inside this hospital. ICU, bed 12. Step back, on the ground, now." Clay's voice was louder this time. The command echoed across the courtyard and bounced off the hospital walls like a public accusation. Jordan glanced toward the second-floor window. He couldn't see into the ICU, but somehow he imagined his mother was watching. Even in her fragile state, she'd always told him to never lower himself in the face of falsehood, but to hold steady, not in anger, not in fear, but with quiet strength. Still, he knew this wasn't the battlefield, and sometimes strength meant compliance, even when it was humiliating. He crouched down, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I'm cooperating," he said, voice calm but strained. "Just please don't escalate this." But escalation had already arrived. As Jordan knelt, Bronson came up behind him. Without warning, he yanked Jordan's arm back hard, twisted it upward, and pushed him forward until his chest hit the ground. Gravel scraped his cheek. A sharp pain shot through his wrist. Clay pulled out his cuffs. "You're being detained under suspicion of impersonating a federal officer." Jordan could barely believe what he was hearing. "Sir, I'm not impersonating anyone. I served this country for 16 years. You can check with the VA, with the Pentagon. I just came to see my mother." "You think I haven't heard that before?" Clay muttered. Every stolen valor case starts with a sob story. In that moment, Jordan realized they weren't listening. Not to his words, not to his tone, and certainly not to the truth. They had already made up their minds, and nothing short of divine intervention was going to change them. He turned his head slightly to the side, the edge of the pavement pressing against his jaw. "Let me show you my ID. It's right there," he said, nodding toward the wallet that still lay on the concrete, unopened. But Bronson had already grabbed his phone, which had fallen when they forced him down. He looked at it, then tossed it aside. The screen cracked on impact. "There's nothing real about this," Bronson mumbled. And with that, the cuffs clicked shut. It wasn't the pain in his wrist that stung most. It was the humiliation. The feeling of being stripped of every honor he had earned, not because he did anything wrong, but because of what they refused to believe. That a black man in uniform could be the real deal. The nurse who had been watching from the door stepped back inside, but not before raising her phone. She started recording. Inside the hospital lobby, patients in wheelchairs, visitors waiting to see loved ones, and nurses rushing to and from elevators. All of them now had their eyes fixed on the window, or the live stream appearing on someone's screen. "Is that a soldier?" one woman whispered. "I think he said his name was Lieutenant Ellis," said another, peering closer. "Did he do something?" "No, they said he was impersonating military, but he's got medals on, real ones." "Lord have mercy," a man murmured from the corner. "This ain't right." Back outside, Jordan tried once more to make his case. "I have a right to make a call," he said, his voice muffled by the pavement. "Please let me contact my commanding officer." Clay scoffed. "You're not in the military anymore, remember? You don't get to call in backup." Jordan's reply was quiet but firm. "You might want to check that." Something in his voice, measured but resolute, caught Bronson's attention for a half second. He leaned down and said, "Who exactly do you think is going to save you?" Jordan looked up, blood on his cheek now from a scrape. "General Elijah Langston." Bronson blinked. "Langston, as in Langston? 4 stars, Jordan replied. "Call him." But neither officer moved. The nurse with the phone recording everything had already slipped back into the ER. She found a quiet corner, locked the video, and sent it to her cousin, who worked for a local news station. Then she did something even more powerful. She walked to ICU room 12. Inside, Eloise Ellis was awake, barely. The nurse leaned in. "Ma'am, I think something's happening with your son downstairs." Eloise's eyes moved slowly. Her voice was faint, but her intention was sharp. "Tell Langston." The nurse leaned in closer. "General Langston?" Eloise nodded once. The nurse pulled out her phone. "What's his number?" With trembling fingers, Eloise motioned toward the drawer by her bed. Inside was an old flip phone, still charged, still full of numbers from a long, hard life. And one number in particular starred at the top, Langston, emergency only. Back on the pavement, Jordan was still lying in the sun, sweat pooling around the base of his neck. His pride scattered on the ground with his cracked phone and trampled wallet. He said nothing now. He didn't need to, because he knew what was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't arrive with sirens. It would arrive with silence, precision, and the kind of authority that couldn't be ignored. The curtains in room 1202 shifted ever so slightly. Eloise Ellis stirred for the first time in nearly 2 days. The machines beside her beeped steadily, oxygen flowing through thin plastic tubes into her nose. Her eyes fluttered open, dry and heavy, as if waking from the deepest kind of dream. It took her several moments to gather her bearings, to remember where she was and why. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. Her throat ached. Her body felt distant. But through the glass window, something caught her attention, something far more jarring than any pain in her chest. Down below in the hospital courtyard, she could see shadows moving, figures in uniform, voices muffled by the thick panes of glass. She squinted through the late afternoon glare. And then she saw him. Her son, Jordan. Flat on the ground, face pressed to the concrete, arms pulled behind his back. Her heart seized, not physically, though it could have, but something deeper. A mother's primal instinct took over, overriding fatigue, medication, even the weight of her stroke. Her fingers trembled as they reached toward the call button beside her bed. The nurse's voice crackled through the intercom. "Yes, Miss Eloise?" She couldn't speak loud. The words came in a thin whisper, like leaves rustling in wind, but the urgency in her eyes, sharp, pleading, was unmistakable. "Get nurse in here," she rasped. Moments later, a young nurse stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Hi, Miss Eloise, I'm Julia. Are you okay? Do you need—" Eloise slowly raised her arm and pointed toward the window. Julia followed the direction of her finger, then gasped softly. Is that your son?" Eloise nodded barely, her lips cracked as she forced out a whisper. "Call Langston." Julia blinked. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Call who?" Eloise gripped the side rail with surprising strength. "General? Langston, Jordan has number in drawer." Julia looked at the bedside table. Inside the top drawer was a battered old flip phone, the kind most people hadn't seen in a decade. She opened it. At the top of the contact list, starred and labeled in all caps, was one name. "Langston, emergency only." Julia stared at it. "General Langston, as in the Langston?" Eloise nodded once more, a single tear slipping from the corner of her eye. "Tell him they took Jordan." The nurse didn't ask questions after that. She picked up the phone. She pressed call, and somewhere miles away in a secure office with walls lined in mahogany and flags, a four-star general's private line began to ring. Eloise let her hand fall back to the bed, her breath shallow but steady. Her eyes never left the window. She could no longer protect her son with her hands, so she did it with her memory, with a name, and with a quiet call that would shake the ground far more than the cuffs ever could. The call didn't go to voicemail. It didn't bounce through a receptionist. It didn't get screened or delayed. The moment the line connected, the voice on the other end spoke with the weight of command, sharp, alert, unmistakably military. "This is General Langston." Julia, the young nurse, held the flip phone with both hands like it was made of glass. Her voice was shaking. "Sir, this is Julia, a nurse at General Memorial Hospital. Miss Eloise Ellis asked me to call. Her son, Lieutenant Jordan Ellis, he's been detained outside by local police, in uniform. They think he's impersonating military." Silence. "Then where exactly?" She gave the hospital address. Her heart was pounding now. "They have him on the pavement outside the ER, cuffed." There was a click. The line went dead. She looked down at Miss Eloise. The older woman had closed her eyes again, her chest rising gently, as if she'd just handed off the burden and trusted the world to do the rest. Outside, Jordan still knelt in silence. The officers had eased their posture slightly, clearly growing uncomfortable under the weight of bystanders filming and murmuring. A hospital volunteer tried to intervene gently, offering to check Jordan's ID himself. He was told to step back. Jordan had said almost nothing since the cuffs were tightened, but now, sensing a shift, he looked up at Officer Clay and calmly asked, "May I borrow a phone?" Clay smirked. "Why, you want to call your lawyer?" Jordan's reply was quiet, direct, measured. Tell General Langston, right now. That name, spoken with such certainty, carried a chill. Bronson's head tilted just slightly. Clay scoffed. What, you think name-dropping some imaginary general's gonna help you now? Jordan didn't respond. He just held the officer's gaze. Across the street, a mother pulled her child closer. A man on a bench stopped chewing his sandwich. One of the ER nurses had come outside and was whispering something to another staff member. And then it began. A low, rhythmic thumping from the sky. At first it sounded like construction, some distant hammering, but the tempo grew faster, louder, more precise. People shaded their eyes and looked up. From the north, slicing through the clouds like steel birds, came 4 military helicopters, flying in tight formation. Not news choppers. Not life flights. Blackhawks. They swept over the hospital once, then again, hovering just above the rooftop where the landing pad stood waiting. Wind whipped through the courtyard. Loose papers flew from clipboards, hair tousled. Nurses gasped. Officer Ronson instinctively reached for his radio. Dispatch, we've got incoming aircraft, military. The hospital parking lot transformed in seconds from a scene of quiet humiliation into a zone of rising tension, awe, and something neither officer had expected. Consequences. Jordan didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Help had arrived. The rotors had barely quieted when the SUV rolled in. It wasn't flashy, no blaring sirens, no spinning lights. Just a sleek black armored vehicle moving with deliberate, unshakable authority. It pulled up to the front of the hospital and stopped without urgency, like it owned the ground beneath it. The rear door opened slowly. And out stepped General Elijah Langston. At 6'4" with silver hair, commanding eyes, and a chest full of ribbons and medals that told the story of 5 tours, 2 wars, and 3 decades of service, Langston didn't need an introduction. The people who mattered already knew exactly who he was. Those who didn't realized it the moment he planted his boots on the pavement. He didn't pause for the cameras. He didn't speak to the crowd. He walked forward with his chin high, flanked by 3 senior officers in uniform and a military attorney with a black briefcase in hand. The wind from the helicopter still churned above, but the real storm had just landed. Officer Clay looked up and froze. His hand instinctively moved to his belt. Not toward his weapon, just something to hold on to, something to anchor himself. Because what stood before him wasn't just a man, it was a reckoning. Jordan Ellis, still kneeling in cuffs, looked up. The moment their eyes met, the lieutenant gave the faintest nod, half respect, half relief. Langston didn't look at Jordan just yet. He kept walking until he was toe-to-toe with Clay. "Which one of you is the arresting officer?" he asked, voice low but unmistakably firm. Clay hesitated. "That would be me, sir." Langston tilted his head. "And your name?" "Officer Clay, Nathan Clay." Langston stared at him for one long moment, then said, without raising his voice, "Remove those cuffs, immediately." Clay glanced at Bronson, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Sir, with all due respect, we were following protocol." The individual appeared suspicious near the emergency entrance in uniform. Langston's eyes narrowed. "Suspicious?" Clay swallowed. "Yes, sir, he was standing near the ICU doors, wearing a military outfit. No name was given at the time." "Did he offer identification?" Clay stammered. He tried, but it wasn't clear. Langston cut in, his voice like cold steel. "Did you ask for it? Did you give him the chance?" Silence. The general turned slightly, glancing toward Bronson. "Did either of you confirm his credentials with the VA? With the base? With anyone? Or did you simply decide that a black man in uniform was a threat?" Bronson said nothing. He looked at the ground. Langston took a breath, not to calm himself, but to choose his words with surgical precision. "That man," he said, gesturing toward Jordan without breaking eye contact, "is Lieutenant Jordan Ellis. He served 16 years in the United States Marine Corps. He led counterinsurgency operations in Kandahar. He saved the lives of 8 American soldiers, including mine. So when you slammed him to the ground outside a hospital where his mother lay dying, you weren't detaining a suspect. You were dishonoring a hero." Clay tried to speak. "Sir, we didn't know." Langston raised a hand, firm, flat, final. "No, you didn't ask, you didn't listen. You acted on what you thought you saw. And what you saw was his skin color, not his service. He turned to the military attorney beside him. The man opened the briefcase and handed over a stack of sealed documents. "These are orders from the Department of Defense signed this morning," Langston said, handing them to Clay. "Both of you are under federal review for civil rights violations and misconduct. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. Turn over your badges, firearms, and radios to my officers." Clay looked stunned. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," Langston said coldly, "is thinking you could strip a Marine of his dignity in broad daylight and walk away from it." The moment the cuffs were removed, Jordan stood up, not with aggression, not with anger, but with the quiet pride of a man who never stopped believing the truth would catch up. Langston walked over and extended his hand. Jordan took it. "I'm sorry this happened, son," Langston said, his voice suddenly gentler. "But I promise you, it ends here." Jordan nodded. "Thank you, sir. I wasn't sure anyone would come." Langston looked back at the two officers being escorted to a waiting transport. "When one of ours calls, we come, always." By now, the entire hospital was watching. Windows were filled with faces. Phones were recording. Some had tears in their eyes. Others clapped softly, uncertain if it was the right moment, but knowing justice in some form had arrived. A little boy sitting on a bench with his grandmother whispered, "Is that man a real general?" His grandmother nodded slowly. "That's what a real leader looks like." Inside room 1202, Eloise Ellis blinked back the tears she could no longer hold. Julia stood beside her, phone still in hand, overwhelmed by what she had just witnessed. Eloise whispered, barely audible, "Told you, he'd come." General Langston didn't waste a second. The moment Jordan was freed and standing tall, the general turned to one of the officers in his security detail, a stern-faced colonel with a satellite phone already in hand. "Get me Homeland Security, then the DOD," Langston ordered. The colonel gave a tight nod and stepped away, already dialing. To the casual observer, the crisis might have seemed over. The man was released, the bad actors removed. But for Langston, this was just the beginning. What happened on that hot sidewalk wasn't just an overreach. It was a failure of judgment, training, and basic humanity. And it couldn't be swept under a rug with a simple apology. Officer Clay and Officer Bronson were now standing off to the side, surrounded by federal military police. Their weapons had been taken, badges surrendered, radios removed from their belts. Clay looked stunned, like someone who just realized the world was much bigger than he ever understood. Bronson's sunglasses were gone. So was the arrogance behind them. Neither man spoke as a military investigator informed them of their immediate suspension, without pay, pending a full civil rights inquiry led by both the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice. "You are not under arrest at this moment," the officer explained with cool professionalism. "But you are no longer officers of the law. You are now subjects of federal review. I suggest you speak very carefully from this point forward." They didn't argue. They couldn't. The weight of what they'd done and who they'd done it to was finally settling in. But General Langston wasn't finished. He turned back to the crowd gathered near the ER doors. Staff, patients, visitors, a few reporters who had somehow already arrived. He walked past them all and entered the hospital lobby with Jordan walking silently beside him. The marble floors echoed beneath their boots. Heads turned. A receptionist dropped her pen. Within moments, the chief medical officer of General Memorial Hospital, Dr. Thomas Raines, was summoned from an executive meeting upstairs. He arrived in a hurried gait, adjusting his tie, clearly already aware that something monumental had happened. "General Langston," he began, reaching out a hand. Langston didn't take it. "You have a security protocol in place for protecting staff and patients from external threats," Langston said, voice cool but cutting. "But what you failed to do today was protect a retired Marine from being profiled and humiliated on your front lawn, while your own contracted security called it in without cause." Raines' face paled. "Sir, I assure you, you will issue a public statement," Langston continued. "Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Acknowledge the incident, accept responsibility, and ensure that every employee on this property, security included, is properly trained to recognize not just authority, but dignity." The hospital administrator's mouth opened, then closed again. "Yes, sir," he said finally. Langston nodded once. "And I want Miss Eloise Ellis moved to a private recovery suite immediately. She's done enough for this country through her son." Jordan looked over, stunned by the gesture. "She wouldn't want special treatment," he whispered. Langston gave him a half smile. "It's not special, it's overdue." News of the incident spread like wildfire. By the time General Langston and Jordan left the hospital, escorted quietly through a side entrance, the story had already been picked up by 3 local stations. Cell phone footage from the nurse and bystanders had been shared across social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, within minutes. The hashtags were already trending. "Salute Lieutenant Ellis, justice at the hospital." Langston steps in. Calls flooded the mayor's office. Local veteran organizations issued statements of solidarity. The American Legion demanded an inquiry. Even several city council members called for an emergency review of the police department's use of force policies. Back at the hospital, pressure mounted on the administration. Dr. Rains held a press conference just before sunset, standing stiffly in front of the hospital's main entrance. With deep regret, he read from a prepared statement, "We acknowledge the failure of judgment and policy that led to the mistreatment of Lieutenant Jordan Ellis, a decorated U.S. Marine and the son of one of our patients. Our security team failed to ask questions. Our staff failed to intervene. And for that, we are truly sorry." He paused before continuing, voice heavy. "We owe more than just care to the families who walk through these doors. We owe them respect. We will do better." Reporters peppered him with questions, but Dr. Rains stepped back without answering. It was clear the apology had been ordered, not offered, but it was still something. Meanwhile, Jordan sat quietly in a waiting room outside the ICU. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just looked down at his hands, still slightly red where the cuffs had bitten into his wrists, and exhaled slowly. Julia, the nurse, came by and handed him a cup of cold water. "Your mom's stable," she said gently, "and she's asking for you." Jordan looked up. For a moment, he didn't feel like a former Marine or the center of a national story. He just felt like a son, grateful his mother was still holding on. "Thank you," he said, softly taking the cup. Justice hadn't arrived with fury or sirens. It had come the same way it always should, with truth, with action, and with people who refused to stay silent. And in that hospital, on that day, the world had watched it unfold in real time. Cable news couldn't get enough. By 6:00 a.m., crews from MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News were already broadcasting from the front of General Memorial Hospital. A local affiliate even replayed the full video on loop during their morning segment with a bold red banner. "Decorated Marine detained outside ICU. General responds in person." Commentators were divided in tone but unified in awe. Some praised Langston's intervention as a return to real leadership. Others focused on police training failures. Still others asked why such scenes had become so common and why it still took a man with 4 stars to reverse what never should have happened. But through it all, Jordan Ellis said nothing. He didn't grant interviews. He didn't issue statements. He didn't even post on his own social media accounts. He simply sat with his mother holding her hand, her heart monitor still beeping softly beside them. Every so often she'd look at him, just a glance, and squeeze his fingers with a strength that surprised him. "You okay, baby?" she whispered once. He nodded even though he wasn't sure. "I am now." Outside the ICU, the world was spinning. Veterans groups organized rallies of support. Local politicians called for police accountability. The city council scheduled an emergency vote to revise procedures involving public detainment. Someone even proposed renaming the hospital courtyard Ellis Square. But Jordan stayed quiet. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew the world was finally saying it for him. And sometimes that was enough. He had always believed in service, in duty, in standing still when others ran. Now his stillness had moved a nation. 1 week later, the sun rose quietly over Washington, D.C. It was the kind of morning that felt still, like even the air was waiting for something to happen. Inside the Pentagon's central courtyard, rows of folding chairs lined the polished stone. Uniforms of every branch were present: Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Veterans in dress blues sat beside new recruits in starched cadet whites. American flags fluttered gently from every direction, casting shadows across the dignitaries, press, and honored guests gathered under a wide summer sky. At the center of the stage stood Lieutenant Jordan Ellis, wearing the same formal uniform he had been arrested in just 7 days prior. The creases were sharper now, the medals had been freshly polished, but the man inside the uniform, he hadn't changed, only the country around him had. To his right sat his mother, Eloise Ellis, released from General Memorial just 3 days earlier. She wore a powder blue Sunday suit, her posture still a little stiff, but her eyes proud, alert, and unshaken. Jordan had wheeled her in himself that morning, her hand resting on his as they entered through the east wing. General Elijah Langston sat just a few feet behind them, arms folded across his chest, face unreadable but steady. He hadn't said much since the hospital. He didn't need to. His actions had said enough. A Pentagon official approached the podium first. She read from a short list of honors, then looked toward Jordan. "Lieutenant Ellis," she said, "on behalf of the Department of Defense and this nation, we thank you not only for your service in uniform, but for your courage in silence, your dignity in adversity, and your example when it was needed most." She stepped back. The audience rose as Jordan took the podium. He looked out over a sea of young faces, 2,000 officer cadets, eyes wide, back straight, the future of American military leadership. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. He waited until the crowd grew still, then spoke, not with force, but with the kind of calm that made people lean in. "I've been through firefights in Kandahar. I've lost friends to IEDs. I've written letters home for men who never made it back, but nothing ever prepared me for being treated like a threat on the soil I swore to protect." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. "I don't stand here asking for apologies. I don't need heads to roll or reputations to crumble. What I need, what this country needs, is for people to open their eyes. Don't look at the uniform. Don't look at the skin. Look at the heart. Look at the soul. Look at the service." He paused. The weight of his words settled like soft thunder. "I didn't ask to become a symbol. I just wanted to visit my mother. And that uniform they doubted, it wasn't made of fabric. It was made of sacrifice." Silence. Then slowly, like waves gathering strength, applause began. Cadets clapped first, then generals, then everyone. Some stood, others wept. And as Jordan stepped down, General Langston stood and gave him a salute so crisp, so heartfelt, that even the reporters stopped taking notes. After the ceremony, guests were invited to view a new addition to the Pentagon's Memorial Hall. It was a sleek black granite wall, recently installed between two steel columns, etched with the names of veterans who had endured discrimination not from enemies abroad, but from bias at home. At the center of the wall, carved in bold serif letters, was Jordan's quote, "Don't look at the uniform, don't look at the skin, look at the heart." Beneath it, in smaller font, Lieutenant Jordan Ellis, USMC. Later that evening, Jordan sat with his mother on the quiet porch of a government guest house just outside Arlington. The air smelled like pine and rain. A pair of rocking chairs creaked in rhythm. "I didn't expect any of this," he said softly. Eloise reached for his hand. "You didn't need to expect it. You earned it." He looked at her, smile faint, but real. "I just wanted to protect people, Mom. That's all I ever wanted. And you still are," she said, "not with weapons, not with rank, with truth." She leaned back, eyes closing briefly. And for the first time in days, Jordan let himself exhale, not because the fight was over, but because he had finally been seen. Not just as a soldier, not just as a black man, but as a human being. And in that small, quiet moment, justice didn't need a spotlight. It only needed a seat beside him. As the rocking chair swayed gently beneath the Virginia sky and the last light faded across Jordan's face, something greater than vindication lingered in the air, a quiet reminder of what truly matters. This story isn't just about a wrong made right. It's not just about a general arriving in time or a viral video turning public opinion. It's about the deeper truth we often forget in today's fast-moving world, that dignity, respect, and grace are not privileges. They are rights. Lieutenant Jordan Ellis taught us something rare and powerful, that strength doesn't always come in the form of force. Sometimes the most powerful stance is simply refusing to lower your voice or your values when the world tries to shrink you down. He never raised his fists. He didn't shout, threaten, or retaliate. He stood steady. He let the truth and the life he had lived speak for him. There's a lesson here for all of us, especially in a time when judgment comes quickly and understanding often comes too late. For those of us who've lived long enough to remember front porch conversations, handshake promises, in a time when a person's word meant something, you know that real character is measured when no one's watching. But sometimes, as in Jordan's case, the world is watching, and when it is, the way you carry yourself can spark change far beyond your own corner of the world. So what can we take from this? We can remember that honor isn't found in medals, but in the humility behind them. That justice doesn't always roar. It often whispers through simple acts of courage. That we owe it to ourselves and to the generations behind us to speak up when something is wrong, and to listen when someone finally speaks. And maybe most of all, we can remember to look beyond the surface, beyond uniforms, skin color, assumptions, and fears, into the heart, because that's where truth lives. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you served with, or someone you raised, or the kind of world you still believe in, let us know. Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true stories that matter. Stories that honor the quiet heroes, expose injustice, and remind us what it means to stand tall in the face of adversity. And of course, tap the bell icon so you never miss the next story, because here on this channel, we don't just tell stories. We remember what they teach us. We pass them on. And together we keep the spirit of justice alive.